Okay, so welcome everybody, and then welcome to this conversation. So to Renewables in Africa channel. So the main objective of our conversation is always to demystify the renewable energy sector for you, to make it easy and seamless for you to connect. So if you're connecting from investment perspective and you're looking for further information to demystify the sector, to know how you can take the right decision, here you have the right channel for you to look at. If you are an investor or a company, you're looking to decarbonize your operation, we're very happy to be talking to you, because in here, in this channel, you're going to have all the information you're looking for. Or maybe if you're a professional, you want to move into the sector, you may be particularly interested by this conversation we're going to have today. What are we going to be talking about today? The decentralized renewable energy sector. So what we know is actually it's very important to be able to achieve SDG 7. We're specifically going to be looking at the job market, right? Just take a person into that. Understand what kind of job has been created, how many jobs has been created, and then what are the trends, so that we make sense of all of it. So I'm pleased today to have two ladies going to give us a lot more information. They're both working for Power for All, and I would leave them the pleasure to introduce themselves first. So Surayana and then Carolina, are you connected? Hopefully, yes. Yes, I can see you're there. Okay, excellent. So Carolina, can you please first of all introduce yourself, and then I have also Sue do the same.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Carolina Pan, and I'm the Research Director at Power for All. Excellent. Brilliant. And you, Sue?
Hi, Tony. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Suranjana, and I'm based out of Mumbai in India, and I work with Power for All as the Director for Partnerships and Campaigns. It's wonderful to be here with you all today.
Excellent. Excellent. That's fine. So I say we're going to talk about the recent report that you have published, from Power for All. But first of all, I think there's still people I suspect that may not know exactly what Power for All is, what is that they do. And I was wondering, maybe see if you can give us a little bit of explanation behind all of it. And after that, we're going to be looking at the topic per se.
Sure, Tony. So for those of you who are not familiar with Power for All, we're an international organization that focuses on the good of energy access. And we emerged from the energy sector itself in 2015 and started to focus on getting the ecosystem to work together and grow the market for distributed renewable energy to end energy poverty. Our mission is to mobilize the network of energy access ecosystems that will help transform the way energy is being used, generated, and paid for, and all of this with the mission to end energy poverty faster. And so we're a global coalition, and we represent more than 300 business, finance, and civil society organizations working towards ending energy poverty, and we focus on countries with less than 50% electrification.
Excellent. I think that's a very detailed description of what the organization does. And I was just wondering, so first of all, I know we're going to be talking about the report here, but where is the need is coming from for us to have such a report, first of all? So I don't know whether you or Karina can discuss about that first, so that we understand why there is a need for this report, and then we can look at maybe the inside and obviously what we can learn from it.
Mm-hmm. Sure, Tony, I can take that question and then hand it back to Carolina for more detailed data from the report. So let's begin with what is energy poverty and why do we need to solve for it, right? We know that about 733 odd million people do not have access to energy right now, and over 3.5 billion do not have access to reliable power. And it's DRE really that has the potential to quickly provide renewable electricity, renewable and reliable electricity to these 733 million people who are trapped in energy poverty. And when you're trapped in energy poverty, it actually prevents you from being able to meet many other markers of development. So we came to do the study on powering jobs for one very clear reason. We found that the diversity of jobs was really not being understood the way it needed to be, both by government and development sector partners. And there was no data to be had even in the early days of our existence as Power for All. So we decided to take the initiative to investigate a ground-up, statistically relevant approach to see what kind of jobs are actually being created alongside the achievement of energy access for all. So If we want to help showcase decentralized renewables employment data for its potential in helping achieve both SDG 7, which you spoke about right at the beginning, as well as SDG 8, which is providing decent work for all. This is the way we can go about achieving both those objectives. So the Power for All Jobs Census is really the most comprehensive DRE jobs data set in emerging markets. And our research focuses on 5 countries right now, but we began with 3 countries in 2018 and 19, which were Kenya, Nigeria, and India. And in the most recent version, which we launched a couple of months back in 2022, we've also added Uganda and Ethiopia to this. So that's pretty much the reason and the context why we feel the Powering Jobs Census is of crucial importance, because data from this census, again, informs countries' statistical offices. It helps them make informed policy decisions in terms of DRE investment and as well as in training for the DRE sector.
Yeah.
Tony, if I may add also, when one speaks about energy transition, there was this myth that there was going to be a lot of job loss because the traditional fossil fuel-based energy sector employs so many people. So we wanted to actually check whether that was true, and we couldn't find data for decentralized renewable energy, right? So we said, how can people think this if they actually don't see any numbers of employment in the DRE sector? So that's where, our Powering Jobs Census campaign emerged. And this is actually the second time around we're doing the Powering Jobs Census. We started in 2019 out of that, knowledge gap that we've identified in the sector. But then because it was so widely cited and became so popular, this is the second time around we're doing it. And the aim is to do it every 2 years.
Okay. That's absolutely very, very interesting. And you talked about those 5 countries. And would it be because those 5 countries are the countries where you see the greatest potential? So, and I was actually wondering, because in those 5 countries, I only know there's only 1 in West Africa, but I know that the sector is actually growing over there. So is there any scope to maybe expand the study along the line of those directions or not?
So do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Carolina, and then I can add in.
Yeah, I mean, ideally the idea is to keep expanding our scope. So we started with 3 countries in 2019. We added 2 more countries. The idea is to fundraise to get, to more than 5 countries, and ideally, the entire sub-Saharan Africa. That's the ultimate goal.
Okay, and I know also in the report, you survey around 250 companies, if I'm correct, right? For you to get those numbers.
Over 350.
Over, okay. Okay, over. It's important to mention that. Because I was going to say, so how did you select those companies? How did you select those companies? Did they sort of volunteer, or you sort of looked at all the players into the market to decide which one was going to be interesting for you?
That was a very labor-intensive process, but I'm going to defer to Sue, who is in partnerships and can talk about it a little bit more.
So it's a combination of a couple of things, Tony. One is, given that we'd done this in 2018 and 19 first, the first survey was actually deployed in 2018, and so we looked at the baseline countries of India, Nigeria, and Kenya, where we already had a contacts database of companies. And given that we were doing this year's survey after the pandemic, I think it was interesting also to see how these companies had fared. So we went back to the same companies to see what their performance was like. Did recruitment continue? Did they manage to expand? Did they manage to stay in business? So that was interesting to see, because it again ties back to the resilience of the sector itself. And we were also helped in this by our partners in the survey. And I'd also really like to mention the support that we get from our funders, very generously funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, Good Energies, and Get Invest Foundation. And through their contacts and through our own network of stakeholders and partners that we reached out to, so whether that's Gogla, AMDA, AFSIA, Shortlist, Ashton, all of them helped us deploy the surveys to companies that are on their database. And so the selection of companies really has been on the basis of the entire value chain of jobs in in DRE, and I think Carolina can qualify that selection process a little more, but this is really a combination of our own database of companies that existed from the previous survey, as well as reaching out to new companies that may have come on the horizon, as well as we began work in Uganda and Ethiopia recently. So there's also a new database that then got added to the research database for us, for jobs.
Okay, that's fine. And I was actually wondering, is it possible maybe to look at the quick highlights of the report? So I think we have a quick presentation that Carolina has, because I'd like for everybody to be able to look at them, and so that we can make even further comment, please.
Yeah, definitely. Let me share.
Yes, it's coming. Excellent.
This?
Yeah.
Okay. And ideally, you're seeing it in full screen, right?
Yeah, that's the case now.
So let me start with the numbers, because this, as I said before, this is where we identified that there was a knowledge gap in the sector. So this is our, our largest contribution. What we find is that direct employment in India is over 80,000 workers. In Nigeria, it's about 50,000 jobs. In Kenya, it's also about 50,000 jobs. In Uganda, it's close to 30,000 jobs. And then in Ethiopia, it's about 14,000 jobs. And, in terms of like magnitude, this is quite significant, because we're not talking about total employment derived from DRE, because that would be direct jobs, but also indirect jobs and induced jobs. We're just talking direct jobs here. So these are people directly employed by a decentralized renewable energy company in any of these countries. And it could be, full-time employment, part-time employment, a contractor, staff, any type of employment, but it has to be a direct employee. Now, we do know that there's a lot more job creation in an indirect way. Either, like, the more people you employ, the more products you also import. So there's also like more jobs for the importers. So it's upstream jobs, but there's also a lot more productive use of energy jobs. We know that there's a lot of jobs that are created just because people have access to energy, right? So there are a lot of estimates about what that multiplier could be, but we believe that for every one direct job that you create at least 4 other indirect and induced jobs. And these numbers, just to give you an idea, for instance, like in Kenya, we find that it's 50,000 people. KPLC, the largest utility in Kenya, employs less than 8,000 people. So, and that's just to come back to this myth that, like the energy transition is going to involve job loss, because it won't. We are showing that, the DRE sector is a very large employer. Now, we also found something that's super interesting, and it is that the sector has been very resilient through COVID. We find that obviously there was some job loss. So if you look at the 2020 numbers, you see there are drops, they're very slight drops in employment, but for all of the countries, there was employment loss. However, this loss was much milder than the job losses in the overall economy. So this is interesting. And the other, I think the most interesting thing probably is that the recovery has been much faster than the job recovery in the rest of the economy for all of these countries. Then you have special cases like Nigeria. Nigeria is a spectacular case because Nigeria is this one, like the blue one that you see that if you look at 2021 levels, right, where it's not that it recovered, because recovery would mean you're back at 2019 levels. It greatly surpassed 2019 levels. It's been growing spectacularly, and we project that it will keep growing. The reason we believe what happened in Nigeria was that the sector was growing really fast before COVID. So COVID probably acted as a cushion to that growth. And then once you lift that, you get that growth again. There are other countries that still are a bit stagnated, like Ethiopia and Uganda, but that doesn't mean that, that the sector is underperforming. In any case, the sector is still doing better than the rest of the economy. And now when you talk about the people now, like if you focus on the workforce, one thing that we find is that the decentralized renewable energy workforce is relatively skilled. Actually, except in Ethiopia, where you have the majority is unskilled. Unskilled workers actually account for less than 25% of the workforce. And if you look at India, for example, you see that the majority is actually skilled. And this is interesting, and this obviously correlates with the level of maturity of the sector. In India, you have a very mature sector. That means that you have a presence of larger technologies. So the technologies we cover: pico-solar, solar home systems, commercial and industrial standalone systems, and then mini-grids. India is where you have the largest presence of mini-grids out of our focus countries. And so it's not surprising that you have a very skilled workforce, because to deal with these larger technologies, you need, more advanced technical skills. So, so we expect that as the sector matures in every country, the average skill level of the workforce will improve.
Okay.
And then in terms of training, which is obviously like the necessary condition to have a skilled workforce, we find that over 50% of the companies actually provide some level of training. So in the graph that you're seeing, the bubbles are the share of companies that actually provide training. And then the bars represent the hours of training. And the hours actually vary a lot across countries. We find that, for instance, and the bars are internal training and external training programs. So if you add up the two, for Kenya, you get 120 hours a year on average for every worker, and that's of internal and external training. But in Ethiopia, you get about 50 hours. And so we ask companies, because this is very interesting to us, like what moves you or what drives you to actually provide training to your workers. All of them want to, because they do see the need to have, a skilled workforce. However, obviously they are financially constrained. They also indicated that there are not a lot of quality training programs. And then they also indicated something very interesting, which was tenure as a barrier for, providing more, or a barrier to providing more training. So essentially what they're saying is, if they expect the people to rotate or to, leave the company, they're not going to invest in them. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about, female participation. So there's, again, a lot of heterogeneity across countries. Essentially, the lowest female participation you find in India at 21%, then Uganda 28%, Nigeria 35%, Ethiopia 37%, and Kenya 41%. Compared to our previous census, we do see improvement, particularly in Kenya. We're still far from gender parity, as you can see. The other thing, one thing to mention is all of these rates really mirror the overall female participation in the economy, which is interesting. So we're neither doing better nor worse in the sector. But one interesting thing is that, and this is across all countries, women are overrepresented in administrative and support roles like assistants or office managers, and they are underrepresented in leadership positions or technical positions. So overall, I would say, the sector is a large, stable, and resilient employer. But there's obviously there's still work to do when it comes to training and when it comes to gender. So I'm gonna, that's the main summary. Okay, so does it mean that if there is any woman who wants to participate, she needs to go into Kenya? That's a conclusion we can say. No, I think these are very good numbers and statistics that you're sharing. So please feel free to send that to me afterward, because I find it quite interesting. So I have a few questions that come out of it for me, right? So number one is, these are all very good data, right? That as I was having the discussion just before we
we start the conversation with Sue, was the fact that there's many good reports that are coming out with valuable information. I'm not sure how much people actually read them. And if people don't read them, so we can't expect any change to happen. So my question to you is, you've done tremendous work here. I think we'll talk about 9 months, maybe more. But how do you now make sure that the information gets to the right people to produce the effect that I'm sure you will want to have?
This is a great question. And, you know, we do a lot of work in dissemination because it's obviously super important that people not only read, but also understand. And we do know that people oftentimes don't have the time to sit down and read a 50-page report, right? So obviously, we make these reports very easy to read. That's number one. Very nice looking and easy to read. There's, you know, colors and graphs and awesome pictures from all of these countries. So just to make them more amusing, I guess, we obviously have an executive summary that summarizes everything that you will find inside the report if you don't have the time. But we also have done fact sheets and summaries that we've distributed and that you can find actually in our website, because that's the key points. If you want to know like 2 or 3 points or like the main messages that you will find. We've done, when we launched the campaign, there was an entire media house that we worked with, and you know, so we did, you know, tweets. We in all of our socials actually we promoted this content, but it's very important that people actually pick it up and carry it and broadcast it to others. So like doing stuff like this to us is very important because we're getting, you know, the message out.
Yeah. So do you believe then that that's, it's not a tricky question, by the way, but I'm just thinking. So as now we know there's something very important happening in Egypt, COP27, we all know. Do you believe that some of the important decision maker would be aware of the finding of your report? And do you believe that it could influence conversation over there?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, and Sue might have a better answer to this, but actually, one of our funders of the report actually took the main messages from Powering Jobs to actually, you know, disseminate at COP27. And that's important to us because obviously it's in the interest of the funders that the messages come across and they get to the right people. In this case, obviously the policymakers. We've done several launches and we've had, you know, policymakers in the rooms of all of these launches because we did in-country launches. So I don't know if you want to add to that. Obviously, like getting it, you know, at a place where you have all of the, you know, top policymakers of the world together is super important. So we do understand that having our funder get that message to COP is very relevant.
Okay.
I think I'll just add another. I'll just add another point to what Carolina said, which is that we had 5 in-country steering committees, Tony, in each of these survey countries. And they were made up of, you know, really leading practitioners, you know, CSO representatives, people from media who were all interested in the message of the campaign itself. So we know that a lot of them will be at COP, and you know, the idea is that they carry that message forward as advocates and champions of the campaign. So that's kind of how the entire Powering Jobs campaign also stays alive and is made relevant within each country and as well as at a global level. So we're hoping that even at COP we'll have messengers of the campaign.
Okay, excellent. I think that's the whole idea behind it. And then another question for me, it's obviously when you have such a report, you at the same time want to impact or inform the decision makers, but as well as people on the grassroots. So what do you expect them to do with such a report? I guess, is it to encourage them to move more into the sector? So how do you expect they will make use of this report? I know some will be very interested and many will be listening to us actually today.
I can answer that, and Carolina can also add in anything that I may have missed later. So Tony, I think one of the main advocacy areas or aspects for us is training. And so in all of our steering committees, we've had members from TVETs, members from UNEP, who work in training and skilling. And so the idea is to be the conduit between companies and and the workforce. So if people are not looking at DRE as a career pathway right now, this is really where the role of, let's say, jobs fairs or career fairs exist. So companies can come there, the youth and women who are looking for employment can also come to these places and then essentially make sure that this is a very viable career pathway for them. So in both ways, one is in terms of working in the sector, and the second is also in terms of looking at let's say DRE applications, which will also aid in in income and livelihood, increase in income and livelihood.
Excellent. So, Karina, do you have anything to add into that? Otherwise,
I was gonna say that overall what we want is to bring data to the right people so that they understand the value in decentralized renewable energy, and that they don't see it, especially the policymakers, they don't see it as a temporary fix, to an electrification problem, but rather a viable alternative to, the business as usual grid extension approach, which is not happening, to be honest, in any of these countries. And, we're so far from the goals, and we want to say, listen, I mean, this is not just, something that you do while you're figuring out grid extension. This is a good sector. This not only helps with electrification, but it also helps with jobs, and we can quantify that and we can show you that. So that's overall our idea.
Okay, good. And sticking with this idea of making a living with the sector, which I clearly support, and I like this idea. So let me ask you a question then. Are you then clearly saying that maybe that's what I've not seen in your report, or maybe there's a part that's talked about that I've not picked out of here, that I wouldn't say guarantee is a strong word, but would you say people can make a living or let's say earn good enough money to support their families with the sector? The reason I'm saying that is, on a regular basis, I do come across people that want to jump into the sector. One element that makes them feel very hesitant is to understand whether or not they can rely on the sector, especially in a sector specifically like off-grid, for example, in order for them to basically support their families and support their lifestyle and so on and so forth. Because one thing to have a job is another thing to have a job that helps you to pay the bills. And in the sector, I've always said, it's important for us also to be aware of this reality, and also to say to people where really we are at the moment and how we can help them if need be to go into the right place. So that's why I wanted to know. I don't know whether your report has picked up this aspect and what you could say about that.
Yeah, it has. We have an entire section on wages, and obviously the numbers vary a lot by country. But you do see that it's a sector that pays enough for people to actually make a living out of it. Like the wages are either average or above average, right? So in that sense, it's a good job. The other thing that I sort of showed but I didn't talk about is that the level of informality in the sector is super low. So these are all very highly informal economies. But what was surprising for us is that the sector, if you see the composition of employment, is mostly except in Kenya, it's mostly formal. We do know that obviously there's underreporting when it comes to informality. People don't want to say that they employ informal workers, et cetera, but even compared to our previous census, where obviously they were facing the same issues, we see that the level of informality really dropped. And that's a good sign for us, because that means that these are stable jobs. So these are jobs that pay well, but they are also stable. And that's probably why the job loss that you see in the sector, or we say that the sector is more resilient, is less than what you saw in the overall economy, because obviously when there's formal employment, it's not as easy to lay people off.
Okay, just to make sure that it is very clear, when you're saying that the sector is informal, but the job, most of the job are formal. Can you clarify
right.
that?
No, so I mean the economies. So like on average, like these economies are highly informal, meaning that most jobs in the overall economy are informal. However, the jobs in the DRE sector are mostly formal.
Understood. Okay. I just want to make sure that that's
Sure.
fine. Okay, no, that's great. So basically, you paint a picture of which is a rather positive picture. So especially in light of what has happened over the last 2 years. So and many sectors have suffered, struggled. And I picture when I was reading myself into this into the report that those countries obviously sort of resisted to the pandemic different ways. And I know that you were saying that in terms of job loss, we had about 1% in Kenya, but 23% in Ethiopia, which was actually interesting. I was wondering, is it because Ethiopia is more informal than formal that, for example, have that difference?
That is definitely one factor that explains. But then there are other factors, right? There is like how COVID hit the overall economy, because there's spillover effects from other sectors in the economy, right? And obviously, you know, in Ethiopia there are other issues. There's conflict in Ethiopia. There's macro issues like, you know, capital controls. It's very hard to get, you know, dollars out of the country. So all of those issues obviously contribute to, you know, a lack of investment in the sector, and then you know, either a slow recovery or from the job loss in COVID. But there's also one interesting thing though, is that again, even, you know, you say 23% loss in jobs, but the overall job loss in the average job loss in the entire economy was higher than that. Yeah, so even if that feels large, it's still milder than that of the overall economy.
Okay, that's fine. I think that's definitely good news and encouraging one for both the sectors and also all these countries.
And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that also all countries dealt differently with COVID. They had different restrictions. So in some countries, like in Uganda, there were very strict lockdowns that, you know, really limited economic activity for a very long time. That was not the case in Kenya. In Kenya, you know, just like the policymakers took different measures, and, you know, like every country obviously has a different reality. So we're not going to judge the measures, but we're going to say, you know, places where lockdowns were more strict obviously suffered more in terms of employment. Yeah,
effectively, because obviously in most of those jobs, so you need the face-to-face human contact to be able to, for the trade to happen. And if the economy is restricted because of people are actually constrained at home, it cannot really happen. It definitely makes sense. And I agree with you. I think having me personally as well, so team member from our company based also in Kenya, I know that it wasn't as restricted as it was, for example, in Uganda. That's great. Just a couple of questions before I can actually release you, because I know you have a very busy day. So, okay, I could see 80,000 people in India, 50,000 both in Nigeria and Kenya, roughly speaking, in Uganda about 30% and 20% in Ethiopia. Okay. And obviously, we could see that it's encouraging. It's more than, for example, in Kenya, more than KPLC, which is the largest utility state company. So what I wanted to know, just to understand exactly where we are, right? Because you're also showing that it's projected to be growing both this year and next year. Where do we need to get to reach our target to electrifying all the 750 million? That's obviously overall globally. But even in those countries, where do we need to get to in terms of the number of people that need to be employed to hit that target of full electrification, for example?
It's a very interesting question that you ask. I would say that more than number of workers, it is allowing for larger systems, right? Because if you think of countries like Ethiopia, most of the employment is from like the sales of Pico solar appliances, like solar lanterns, right? That's not going to help us a lot to, you know, reach the universal electrification that we're hoping for. We would like to see maybe larger systems, right, in the country. Now, what's tricky is that, you know, there's there's not a one-to-one relation. Like the larger the system, the less labor intensive it gets in a way. So I wouldn't say we need an X number of employees to reach universal electrification. There are a lot of reports that actually say how much money we would need to reach universal electrification. And I think what we need to just acknowledge is that the sector is important. It's a large employer, and because of that, we should keep investing in the sector, and we need to see it as a viable alternative. For me, what's most worrisome is that in some countries, like in Ethiopia, even when you see the national electrification plans, including DRE, it's only as a middle step, right? They say, okay, we're gonna use DRE, but then in 2030, we're gonna, increase, the grid extension. And we want to say, listen, this is electrification. This provides jobs. This is good, right? In Nigeria, we project that the job growth is gonna reach the levels of the entire oil and gas sector, which is a lot. Like that's a lot of jobs, and so our goal is that people actually view it as such, as an important sector that is a large, stable, and resilient employer, and not as a quick fix.
Okay, excellent. I think that's fine. And I saw also in the report that the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, we talked about 65,000, so that we're getting close to 50,000. So okay, that's fine. That means probably another 5 years and that's it. So it'll be the largest employer into the country. No, that's fine. Excellent. So just one quick question, then I'm going to allow you guys to wrap up your final comment for people to leave this conversation with. So you mentioned about finances that is needed to grow the sector. So, and I want both you and Shweyana to comment on that. What else is needed to 10x, if it's not the number of people, the impact, so that we can really get to where we want to? Because like I say, usually what drive progress, as far as I know, it's a clear vision that we have, and for us well to measure whether or not that vision, or whether we're getting closer to that vision, is to have some metric for us to check whether what we're doing makes sense, works or not. So apart from investment, what else is needed, would you say, I think the two of you, to get to that full electrification that we're chasing?
So I'll let you go first.
Thanks, Carolina. Tony, I think it's really important to focus on financing training, because if you are going to be meeting SDG 7, it really can't happen without a human capacity pipeline. And where does that come in? That really needs to come in from skilling the right amount of people. So if you are generating demand on one side for DRE, you also need to be able to ensure you actually have the human beings who can make that demand possible, to supply that demand. So I would say that finance is really important for ensuring the right kind of curriculum is included in in institutions and colleges, so that that's made available to youth who are looking at this as a career pathway, and then the right kind of conducive environment, I think, for all these companies to thrive in each of these countries. I mean, the more these companies grow, they're going to be able to have sustainable businesses, employ more people, and be able to electrify more and more communities that need DRE.
Excellent.
Over to you, Carolina.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was just going to say the regulatory environment is very important. It's one of the main barriers to the deployment of DRE, of mini-grids, actually, of large mini-grids. And, obviously, what Sue was talking about, having a conducive environment where, it's easy to do business is crucial. Right. So part of what explains the rapid growth of DRE in Kenya is that they had the right environment and it was easy to do business. So a lot of companies found it like a great place to be at. And it's not the case in other countries. So maybe it's time for, the right policymakers to think about the legal and regulatory framework that now, limit their energy sector.
Excellent, that's fine. And just final words. So is the report available for everybody to find out? So
course, free.
I'm literally dropping it in the chat box right now.
Okay, excellent. That's fine. So there's no excuse not to be aware of it, right?
Absolutely. Please go right ahead, download it, take a look at it, reach out to us if you have any questions or you'd like to have a discussion.
Excellent, excellent. So listen, Carolina and Sue, I think it was a pleasure for me to be talking to you this afternoon. Like I say, so when we have such an important report that gives us an idea where we are towards the vision that we built for ourselves, so it's good for us to be able to take a look at it. Not only to take a look at it, but take action to make sure that next year we have an even better report. And who knows, maybe in a few years' time, so we have different kind of problems. So there's so many people working in the sector, and then we're looking at other ways to make improvement. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So I make sure that we share the message across. It's always a pleasure to support the great work that Power for All is doing. And yeah, so what can I say? As opposed to yeah, all the best, and looking forward to what we're going to get for next year. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.